Hello students, I will introduce this module by informing you or drawing your attention to the three latest additions to visual communication in the news. The first one related to the international designer known as Carolina Herrera, and she was called out by a Mexican minister for basically appropriating indigenous design patterns of Mexicans and using them in her latest resort collection. So it raises an interesting question about who owns certain visual patterns. The next one was the fact that there are drug makers who are now being required by the government to put into their TV ads just how much the drug that they're advertising costs. And so some of them have gotten together now and are suing the government, saying this is a violation of their First Amendment right, because the government is not supposed to prevent you from saying anything you want or force you to say something you don't want. So the drug makers feel that they're being forced to reveal the price of their drugs in the TV commercials. That's an interesting issue. And then finally, in stores, secret surveillance tracks your every move. So if you've ever been in a store and you're sitting there looking at some yogurt, and then all of a sudden you get a buzz on your phone and you got a discount coupon for that particular brand of yogurt that you're looking at, and you say, how could this happen? It turns out there are these things called Bluetooth beacons, which are being used more and more in stores. And so basically, depending upon the settings on your smartphone, it could know where you are in the store, what you're probably looking at, and send you a coupon to try and get you to purchase that thing that it knows you had paused briefly to look at. So that's another interesting topic. So now the rest of this module, let's see what's on the agenda. I now have your visual analysis essays, and as has often been the case, most of you chose to use Lester's 6 perspectives, and so I'm looking forward to reading all of your visual analyses. And then we've got a little discussion from readings from last week, visual manipulation in mass media, and also perception and memory. So you're taking a quiz on that. Many of you, I think, were a little sort of disconcerted by the fact that we begin misremembering almost immediately, but that's what the latest research seems to indicate. And then we're going to get into visual communication in interactive media. And so what I've got are, there's an essay by an author, and it's a little dense, and he very quickly points to another researched argument which is kind of dense. And so in the past, what I've done is I've tried to unpack these fairly dense articles for you. And I've done that one with a PowerPoint that goes point by point through one of the articles. And then one term, when I was still teaching this face-to-face, I actually spent half of a class videotaping me explaining some of the concepts in these 2 articles. And so you have access to the articles themselves, a PowerPoint where I am making points about the articles, and then also a videotape of me explaining the points I'm trying to make. And then towards the end, basically there's a quiz on all that material. So with a combination of those resources, you should be able to understand pretty well what is being said there. And then I get into 2 people on web design. One is Steve Krug, who has a famous book called Don't Make Me Think, and then Luke Wroblewski on web design. And so those are fairly easy and straightforward, and they're going to give you some thinking that now is maybe like 15 years old, and you say, well, that can't be current. Well, it turns out people are still saying that Steve Krug, when he said, don't make me think 15 years ago or more, was actually correct. So what I'll do now is append this new introduction to that video introduction to the content and post it, and it'll soon be available to you. Ago, I pointed out that the word theory comes from the Greek theorein, which is to look at or to view. So that basically a theory is a way of looking at something. So most of you used Lester's 6 perspectives. Some people combine that then with some theory of typography, particularly stuff coming from the Goodhart-Willcox text. And so one of the things I noted is that there's an old saying, every picture tells a story. And so each one of these pictures that you chose, there was a story behind it. And one of the things that the theory allowed you to do was tell a kind of interesting and coherent story. And again, the more coherent the essay in terms of you proceeded in an orderly fashion from one aspect to another, and also the more sort of careful the editing of the prose at the surface level, at the sentence level, the paragraph level, make for better stories or stories that are a little harder to follow. But what that then connects to is the readings that we had for last week, and one of them was visual manipulation in mass media. So we actually had 3 different examples of propaganda. We had the U.S. propaganda produced in World War II to support the war effort, and so that was stuff that some of you are probably already familiar with, and if you looked at it, you'd say, okay, this is kind of good stuff. This is doing something we want to be doing. And then there was the propaganda film by the Third Reich, and if you spend any time looking at the parts of that I had identified, you could say it's like, wow, I can see how this is very powerful, and it really has to do with these visual images. You have images of German culture, and you have images of military strength and religious sort of devotion, and health and fitness and hygiene, and all these ideas that the filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl was able to communicate in a story that is largely just a collection of images. We are soon going to be moving into visual communication that moves. So that was sort of a nice way to get into it. And then finally, there was that collection of political cartoons that were anti-communist cartoons in different countries, former Soviet satellite countries, just as the Soviet Union was falling apart. So those 3 different approaches to propaganda, I hope, gave you sort of a sense of, there were some commonalities there in terms of what it is that someone who has a message that they want to communicate, the pictures that they pick, and the reliance upon certain symbols, that the audience for those pictures would understand the symbol of a family sitting down to Thanksgiving dinner as symbolic of freedom from want, etc. So I hope you were able to gain some understanding of the way propaganda worked in those 3 different connections. But the whole idea, if we go back to the first week, one of the things that was in the reading, and it was on one of the first quizzes, was, okay, the behaviorist notion of vision, that a stimulus comes into our eye and then we respond to it, clearly is not adequate to the complexity of what's going on. And so then one of the things that is going on is we are constructing stories. And then one of the most interesting things of recent research is that we are constructing stories almost instantaneously. Within a nanosecond of perceiving it, we are remembering it, but we're not remembering it correctly. We are misremembering it within a nanosecond of perceiving it. So it's not just the case that every picture tells a story, but we are in the business of making stories based upon who we are. So what we bring to something we see is rather significant. So depending upon your ethnicity, your race, your religious beliefs, your background, the family that you grew up in, you're going to bring those things to anything you see, and then you're going to write the story of what you saw. And so then the whole notion of objective observation, that somehow you would have an unbiased interpretation of what you saw, gets a little bit problematic. Okay, so visual design project number 3. It's in this module. You'll be able to click on it and see what it is. And so this time now you are going to do something that involves motion media, motion graphics. So in the assignment, you can see that you can do this with a PowerPoint, with a narrated PowerPoint. You can do it. I used a thing called, I can't remember what it's called, but you'll see the example that I've made in there. Or you can shoot video. So I suggested in the assignment, in past years, people doubled up and formed teams, and that was handy if they're shooting video, because then you got one person operating the camera and the other person maybe being the on-camera talent. Because this is an online class, and I don't know to what degree any of you actually know each other or are in classes with each other, that might be kind of challenging. But if I can do anything to support you, pairing up with somebody else, let me know. Short of that, you might have a family member who could operate the camera if you're choosing to use video. But again, you don't have to use video. But there are, not in the samples that I have attached to the assignment, but I'll show you some samples of what. Oh no, there is one. What's his name? The Swiss tennis star, Roger Federer, slow motion of his serve. So both slow motion or speeded up motion are ways that you can use moving images to communicate something. Okay, so that assignment is not due for it's almost 3 weeks. I think April 16th. So then we've got 3 other parts of this module: visual communication and interactive media. So I assigned a kind of short theoretical article, but it's very dense. And very quickly into the article, the author referred to another theoretical article, which is fairly dense. And so in years past, I realized this stuff is kind of challenging. So what I did was I created a PowerPoint that explains some of the ideas in these 2 readings. And then a year or 2 ago, I actually videotaped myself delivering that PowerPoint. So you have access to PDFs of the articles, you have a PowerPoint explaining the articles, and one of the things I often do in PowerPoint is I put a lot of stuff in the notes pages. Well, in this case, there's not much in the notes pages. So the stuff that's not in the notes pages, you can actually see me by watching the video. Now, the video was the first portion of a 3-hour class, so the video runs 59 minutes. One of the great things about videos on YouTube is you can watch them at a faster speed. So depending upon how fast you can tolerate me talking, you could actually watch that video in as few as 30 minutes. So the 2 articles are visual communication and interactive media, and the 3 paradigms of HCI, that's human-computer interaction. And then after that, I go to Steve Krug, a web design expert, author of Don't Make Me Think, and then he's talking about skeuomorphs. You'll figure out what they are from a Canvas page, and flat design. And Steve is a rather entertaining presenter. So in the video of me giving a lecture, in that lecture, I'm showing the relevant Steve Krug video. So I think you'll enjoy that. And then it ends up with a page and a chapter from Luke Wroblewski on web design. Luke Wroblewski is now a sort of a product designer at Google, and he's worked his way up to that through being sort of a bigwig, a web design savant for some of the premier tech companies in the recent past. So that's all that's in this week's agenda.